Alright, welcome back to the JFK Assassination Audit, video number 68. Today is 28 February. We're going to go into Fraziers, Follies, number 3, more testimony of Mr. Frazier here. And so we're still at the 1969 State of Louisiana versus Clay Shaw trial. We're going into Frazier's testimony. So it says, Mr. Diamond, I object to leading the witness, Your Honor. I sustain the objection. Can you demonstrate by perhaps hitting your hand like this as a succession of shots, the noises you heard? You mean all 3 shots? Right. Okay. Demonstrating by clapping his hands. Did you make any determination of the time from the noises that you've just reported to what location they came from? They appeared to me to come from down towards the triple underpass. There you go. Would you leave the witness stand once more and show me the area where the noises sounded to you like it came from? So, being in the military, we fired weapons and fired them in the field and fired them in forests and fired them in canyons and fired them in urban areas, and I'm not an expert at this, but I can tell you that if you've got multiple people firing shots, that a lot of times you're only going to hear the shots that are closest to you, and that shots may come on top of other shots. And also, someone could be around the corner and firing a shot, but because of the buildings, it may sound like it's coming from the opposite direction because of echoes. And that is one point that I do agree with about what they were saying in the movie there, where the police were saying, you heard echoes, like that. So, also, you know, it wouldn't be the first time that specialized military people use silencers or noise suppressors for their rifles, for their shooting. It's just not, it's not beyond reason to say that that might have happened. So, if you've got one rifle on the 6th floor firing 3 shots, all the other shots coming from, say, the Daltex building, the grassy knoll, could all have suppressors or be covered up by the loud rifle shots coming from the 6th floor. So it's not, beyond belief that there were more than one rifle firing at the same time. Alright, so keep going here. And then he does the clapping with his hands. It says, Mr. Frazier, did you make any determination at that time the noises that you just reported as to what location they came from? They appeared to me to come from down towards the triple underpass. Would you leave the witness stand once more and show me in the area where the noises sounded to you like they came from? Here is your triple underpass right here. Would you repeat your answer? I said it sounded like it came from down in the area of the triple underpass. Where did you go after the noise, if anywhere? I didn't go anywhere, I just stayed right where I was. Did you ever see Lee Harvey Oswald during that time that we were on the steps in front of the school book depository? No, sir, I did not. See, now they get close to where he's at, where he says he's on Houston and Elm, and he sees Lee Harvey Oswald come out, but he doesn't go into an explanation of that. Did you come back into the building after the presidential motorcade went under the triple underpass? Did you go back into the Texas School Book Depository after the shots were fired? Right. Yes, I stayed there at first and talked to several people who worked there in the building. Then some of them started going back inside, so I went back inside with some others. Prior to going back inside, did you see where any of the crowd that was viewing the presidential motorcade may have gone at the time the shots were fired? Quite a few people ran down, like I said, in the direction of the triple underpass. Did you see any policemen there? At the triple underpass, yes, there were some, just like regular policemen at the time. When I said previously they were running and screaming and hollering, some were running in that direction towards the president's motorcade, where the president's motorcade was. After going back into the Texas School Book Depository, did you have occasion to see Lee Harvey Oswald? No, sir, did not. See, so either he's not answering the question about seeing Lee Harvey Oswald come around the back of the building, coming up Houston and going to Elm, because they're not asking the specific question, did you see Lee Harvey Oswald come around the back of the building or any time after you left the steps? Or he's covering it up, or he's lying about seeing Lee Harvey Oswald come around the back, off the back deck, up Houston and through Elm. See, that's a very, very important point, I think. But for some reason, they're either not asking the right question or he's avoiding answering anywhere close to where he saw Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm not sure what's going on. Where did you go when you went back into the building? I went back in and stayed there and talked to some of the people who worked in the building. We walked in there. We talked in there. I did not eat my lunch. Several of us had not eaten our lunch. And I went and I got my lunch and ate my lunch. Where inside the building did you eat your lunch? I usually eat my lunch in the basement where I hang up my coat. I sat down like I usually did and ate my lunch. Mr. Frazier, had you planned? Okay, so this is what I find unbelievable, but hey, maybe it's possible. So you got this building where the assassination just occurred. Now it's starting to get swarmed by police and surrounded by news media and by pedestrians. And the building's getting flooded by policemen that are searching all over the building. You think they would search the basement also. But after all this happens, he just goes back and eats his lunch. It's kind of strange, I think. Very, very strange. Anyway. Mr. Frazier, had you planned to take Lee Harvey Oswald back to Irving on the night of the 22nd? No, sir, I had not. Why not? He told me in the afternoon before that he would not be going home that afternoon. Did he give you a reason? No, sir, he did not. You see, these are one of the things that makes Lee Harvey Oswald look guilty. Okay, because all the other Friday nights, he went home with Frazier. But on this Friday night, after the assassination, he told him ahead of time he wouldn't be going home with him. At least that's what Frazier is saying. Did you question him as to why he was not going home? No, I did not. Mr. Frazier, I'm going to show you what I've marked for the purpose of identification as State Exhibit 38 and ask you to view this and see whether or not you have seen the item held by this man in the picture before or a similar item at that time. I won't say I saw this, the one he is holding, but I've seen one similar type, yes. See, it doesn't say what it is. Where did you see one of similar type? It was a type of package. They were lying on the back seat of the car you questioned me about earlier. So somehow either the DA's office has gotten a hold of the FBI warrant exhibit of the brown package, which I highly doubt, or they've constructed their own fake brown package. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Did you see Oswald carrying this type? Objection. He is leading the witness. Rephrase your question. Did you ever see Oswald carrying the package in the back of the car? We object. This is repetitious. I will permit the question. Did you ever see Oswald carrying the package that was in the back of the car? Like I said previously, he took the package out of the back seat on November 22nd. What was the color of this package, if you recall? The color is similar to the type of pepper sack that you would obtain from a grocery store. The color was primarily the same. Can you approximate for us the width of the package? I would say it was 5 or 6 inches in width. Mr. Frazier, approximately how far were you from Lee Harvey Oswald as he entered the book depository that morning? I would say 50 feet. Were you ever closer to him than that on your walk from the car to the book depository? The only other time was when I first got out of the car and he started to walk ahead of me. I turned to the witness, will you and Mr. Dimon step up here a second? It is 16 minutes after 6. The examination on direct was approximately 45 or 46 minutes. I don't want to put any pressure on any side, the defense or the state. The gentleman wants to go back to Texas tonight. Mr. Frazier, you're ordered by the court not to discuss your testimony, and any other witness, whether you have been called or not, you are under oath. But I'm not stopping you discussing your testimony with the state representative by the district attorney's office. You will have to remain overnight in New Orleans. Can I introduce evidence that which has been marked as S38 for the purpose of identification? To which we object. There is nothing but testimony that is similar, and there is nothing characteristic at all. The weight is up to the jury. I will admit your exhibit as being similar, to which ruling we object and reserve a bill of exemption, making exhibit S38 the state's offering, the defense objection, the reason for the objection, the ruling of the court, and all the testimony up to prior part of the bill. So what that tells me is most likely this is a reconstruction of the paper sack. They're not saying it, but that's what it seems like. Mr. Frazier is excused to the witness stand. I ask you to leave and come back tomorrow at 9 a.m. The state wishes to introduce the file into evidence, to which has been marked for identification as S34, the aerial photograph taken of Dealey Plaza. The state also wishes to offer into evidence S35, the plat drawn by Mr. West, and S36, the markup of this area of Dealey Plaza, to all of which offerings we object on the ground of relevancy. And additionally, we regard S35, we object on the ground it contains matter which is hearsay, not being the product of mind of memory of the author. I will do with respect to hearsay on that before it is examined. If it is examined by the jury, I will admit it subject to those portions of the exhibit which do contain hearsay, and will have to put something over to cover it up. Let me hear your objections as to the others before I rule. So what the defense is doing is setting up objections for when they, if he's convicted, to go to appeal. All right. Irrelevant to this issue in this case, they are not competent evidence, and we're basing the objection further on your Honor's previous rulings that the happenings in Dallas, Texas, have nothing to do with this case. The court, I overrule your objection. All three exhibits can be received in evidence. In particular, the regard to the plat, you can tell me what part are hearsay. I would not tell you in front of the jury. We will have to examine it before we begin tomorrow. We'll have to paste over and put out of view anything that is hearsay. Other than that, I will admit it. So what they're talking about is the transcript. So the clerk is going to record everything that's said in the courtroom, even if the jury is not present. So if the jury leaves and the clerk records something that's an objection by the defense or whatever, all the words are going to be in the transcript. So they don't want the jury to hear that, so the judge is agreeing to paste over it to cover that up on the transcript, so the jury won't be aware of what was discussed when they weren't present. Which makes sense, because that would bias the jury with whatever they say there. Because, the way things are, people are human, and they're going to take in everything they hear and read. So if they don't hear something, and then they read it later, they're going to take that as being much more relevant. And they're going to take that, whether they say that they are or not, into their decision. All right. Let's see, we'll keep going. After the jury has gone, I will ask the sheriff to remain behind. I will let the spectators leave, and I will permit the photographers to come in and take pictures of these 3 exhibits. I do not want any spectators to be shown in the pictures at all. Have the spectators leave. A member of the jury, Your Honor, could we have a few seconds to view 34 and 36? The court, you want a few seconds to view 34 and 36? A member of the jury, yes, sir. I see no objection. If you want to leave the jury box, you can walk over here, there if you want to. Wow, that's kind of unusual. Usually they wouldn't allow that. Anyway, a member of the jury, as we are passing by, can we look at it? The court, let me make my admonishment. When you leave, they may want to stop and look at the markup and exhibit. Do not discuss the case with each other or anyone else until it is finally turned over to you for the verdict. For the record, I am telling the minute clerk to turn over exhibits S37 to Mr. Landry, the property clerk, to lock it up in his vault. Mr. Shaw, you are released under the same bond until 9 o'clock tomorrow. This court will stand adjourned, but I will be here to make sure the picture taking is done properly. We stand adjourned until 9 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I did want to mention about the court and this judge, Judge Haggerty, I believe. Now in the film, they make it look like he's just some redneck that's biased towards the defense. But I was astonished when I saw film later of him being discussed. I think it was in the Men Who Killed Kennedy. The Men Who Killed Kennedy. That Judge Haggerty was saying that, well, this is like 20 years later, was saying that he believed from all the evidence that was presented, there was a conspiracy and that Shaw was involved in some way. But he went along with what the jury said because that's the way our system works. But he said if it was up to him, he would have ruled against Shaw, and that Shaw was part of the conspiracy. Which I agree with it. Because Shaw, this is the weak part of the case, but the thing you have to understand about why Shaw was charged by Garrison is that everybody was getting either committing suicide, waking up dead, or being killed. Shaw was the only one that was left alive, okay, of all the people. So Bannister died of a heart attack. Let's see, Ferry supposedly committed suicide, but might have been killed. There were lots of other people that were witnesses and people that were involved in that were all disappearing. I think the reason he went after Shaw is because even though Shaw wasn't essential in the assassination plot, he was kind of like the handler, the money man, the top guy in New Orleans, I guess you could say, besides Bannister. That's what he came across, that Bannister was, kissing Shaw's ass, was underneath him. Ferry was underneath him. What's his name? Everything seemed to be essentially under Shaw. And so Shaw was sort of the, I guess you could say station chief for New Orleans, okay? So that's why he was going under him. The thing that's interesting about Shaw is that he got all these other people to do all these, the guilty things, and he kind of stayed in the shadows while his hand kind of guided everything. And it wasn't really him that was guiding everything. He was being told what to do, and then that was being handled through Shaw, and then basically through Shaw to Bannister directly. But Bannister was already dead. Ferry committed suicide just like a month before Shaw was arrested. So that's why he went after Shaw, even though the case was weak. I personally would have done it flipped the other way. I would have gone after the Cubans, the white supremacists, the CIA contractors on the lower level, underneath Shah and underneath Bannister, and then I would have flipped them and worked my way forward, because there are plenty of people that I'm hearing testimony of recordings, like Martin, like Beaufort, and what was this other guy? Who's this other lady? Dottie Bridges. A lot of other people that knew about Shah and knew about his connections and knew about, all these other people in the lower end. I would have started, like you go after the mafia. You don't go right after the kingpin, okay? You go after the street level guys, okay? And then you turn them, you flip them. And then from there you get the lieutenants. And then from there you get their bosses. And then from there you get the mafia bosses. And then from there you get the kingpin of the family. The Don. That's what I would have done. But, he did it differently. He went straight for, Shah, because he's afraid that if he rolled these people from the bottom up, that so many people would have been dead, there wouldn't have been anybody left to prosecute. Because, that's the thing about the CIA operatives that were on the lower end, the rogue operatives that were running this, is that they were going to kill off all these other street soldiers first until there was nobody left, or everyone else was scared enough not to testify. So that's what's going on there. But Haggerty did say that he thought that the evidence was pretty clear that Shah was involved in the assassination somehow. Anyway, all right, so we'll keep going. We got about 3 more minutes. It says, here's the next day. And it says, pursuant to the adjournment, the proceedings herein were resumed at 9:10 o'clock a.m. on Friday, February 14th, 1969, appearances being the same as heretofore noted in the record. The court: I trust you gentlemen had a restful night. Is the state and defense ready to proceed? Mr. Alcott: yes, Your Honor. Mr. Demon: yes, we are. So I wanted to say something about the state of justice and the state of the courts, even in corrupt 1963 Louisiana, that you have to be pretty damn proud that, even in a country where we have these corrupt, murderous government employees, I guess you could say, working for us, that would kill their own president, that we still have some semblance of justice and the justice system that still survives, even though that same justice system is defending one of the murderers of the President of the United States. Okay? So you got to understand the ironic and the fantastic, I don't know how to say it exactly, but that even in a corrupt system that is run, that is helping to kill the President of the United States, we still allow the justice system to work properly, at least on a micro level, to defend one of the persons accused of killing the President of the United States. And I know this doesn't make any sense, but what I'm saying is that the system works, okay? And the system works in the Shah trial. What happened in the Shah trial is exactly the result that should have happened, okay? There wasn't enough evidence and preponderance to go after Shah to link him, beyond a reasonable doubt to the assassination of the President of the United States, even though it was pretty damn obvious he was involved. But it shows you that the system worked, okay? Even though I was fully behind Garrison, I thought Shah should have gone to jail, but there just wasn't enough evidence. And that shows that the system worked. Okay? That, you would hope. And here's the thing, you have to look at the American justice system. Is not that you hope it gets all the bad people that you don't like, politically or morally or whatever, regardless of the evidence. Okay? Because if a prosecutor or the government, who's what the prosecutor represents, can go after anyone and incarcerate them or have them end up in jail, in prison, just because they don't like them or just because they think they did something, then justice is gone in the United States. And this is something that I think the people on the left and the right seem to forget and seem to not appreciate, okay, is that regardless, we'll take, for instance, Trump, okay? I don't like Trump. I think Trump's corrupt as can be. I think Trump's been turned by the Russians, been used by the Russians. He's very selfish. He doesn't give a damn about the American people or the American government. But I do believe that Trump deserves his day in court, deserves a full defense according to the Constitution, and not a kangaroo court. Just because I think he's corrupt doesn't mean he shouldn't get his day in court and his defense and his ability to present evidence, his ability to post bail, all these things that we all screaming about the government to guarantee to us, we should have at least to guarantee to Trump. And see, that's when you know the system works, is when everything that you scream about for justice for yourself, okay, the only way it really, really works is if you scream just as loud for the people that you don't like and you're politically completely opposed to. That they get the same rights and the same justice that you would demand for yourself. And I know that sounds ironic, but it's not we're in power, so we're going to destroy whoever and take away their rights because we believe we're right. Then that makes us no better than Hitler and Stalin and all these other dictators through time. Okay? When the system really works is when the people that we hate and oppose the most get the same justice and the same access to justice in the justice system and their defense that we would expect for ourselves. Okay? And this is what I like about reading these transcripts, is that you're seeing that even though we don't like it, even though we know Shaw's guilty as hell, he's still getting his day in court and the justice that we would want for ourselves. And that's basically all I'm saying. I would want the same thing for Trump, although I think Trump seems to slip through the cracks for most of us who end up, being arrested and getting to jail. But I would want the same constitutional guaranteed rights for Trump, and a right to a fair trial, and a right to present his evidence, and a right to confront his witnesses, and a right to bail, and a right to, present his case, that I would demand and scream for myself. And that's what we're doing for Shaw here. And it makes me disgusted that Shaw gets off, but it also makes me proud that our system works. And that, at most, even though Garrison had him, he had him. He busted him. He laid the case out. He did his investigative job and found out what was really going on. Okay? He found out that Kennedy was killed by the right-wing elements of the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Dallas police, the oil companies, the Texas oil company billionaires, right-wing elements, anti-Castro forces of the Cubans, and right-wing CIA operatives. He nailed it. He got it all. He did it all correct, and he got all that evidence, okay? He got it right. He opened the door, and then through Oliver Stone, we opened the door a little bit more, and got the AARB and got all these records released, and this is what we're looking at now. Now, whether I think Garrison could have done things differently, I do think so. But I wasn't there at the time, and I didn't have the resources he did, and I didn't have the limited resources and funds that he did. And then whether Oliver Stone got everything right in the film, I disagree with some of the things, but at least he cracked the door open and got us to where we are today, okay? And don't you think it's ironic that, let's see, it was 1992 that the Assassinations Records Review Board Act was passed, okay? So 1992 from 1963 is 29 years, okay? And it's now 2023 minus 1992. It's 31 years, okay? So from the time of the assassination to the time of Oliver Stone's movie, okay, and the Assassinations Review Board, where we didn't have hardly any documents, was 29 years. But 31 years after that act was passed, almost the same amount of time from the assassination to Oliver Stone's movie, we're still have documents out there. 60 years passed when the president was killed. There's still documents out there. And the thing you have to ask yourself again is, if Lee Harvey Oswald was just a crazy lone nut that did it all just by himself and killed the president of the United States, okay, then why are they still keeping fucking records top secret? How come we can't see Ruth Payne's and Marina Oswald's and Lee Oswald's tax returns after 60 years if he's just a lone nut? It doesn't make any sense. If it was just him, what would be top secret about his fucking tax returns? What would be top secret about Ruth Payne's and her husband's tax returns after 60 years? If Lee Oswald's just a lone nut, why is it that all these elements of groups of people that were opposed to Kennedy, okay, and were all planning all these things and hated Kennedy and got caught planning to kill Kennedy, were all ignored, okay? And we all know now they were involved in the assassination, but they were all ignored by the FBI and the Warren Commission. But if you look back now, it's very obvious that the FBI and the Warren Commission knew. They even have it in their reports, the information about these groups. They knew about them. They knew they existed, and they knew they were involved. But it all stopped and ended at Oswald. Anyway, I didn't mean to get on a rant there, but just reading this, it makes me frustrated that, Shaw didn't get convicted. But it also makes me proud that the system worked, that I would hope that if I was ever in court and the prosecution was presenting evidence like this, that I would have a chance to refute all this evidence and have my day in court and have my justice to face my accusers like it says in the Constitution, And that, hey, the reason why Shaw got off is because Garrison didn't have enough evidence. He didn't have a home run. He didn't up his game. Okay? This is why. But then again, if Garrison was so off and so wrong, why did the whole full weight of the government come after him and try to frame him, okay, for these bribery charges, and then try to go after him after he got off on the bribery charges on tax evasion for the money supposedly he got from the bribery charges that he was acquitted on? Why would the government do all this just to silence, Garrison after the fact? Okay? So that tells you that there had to have been somebody in the government that knew what was going on. Anyway, so we're going to go back into the Des Moines Shield tapes here. But again, like I said, I wish Shaw got convicted, but I am proud that our system worked. At least it worked.
Lee understood it, but we do not know if his wife did. In her strange way, maybe Marina considered her marriage to Lee and her arrival in the United States a great success. Maybe her life in USSR was even more dismal than her life here. That we shall never know. One day she related to my wife the following. What a fool was that Lee, he's throwing his passport in the face of the US ambassador. He said, I will never go back to the United States. She obviously considered the mirage of the United States as a reality. Maybe she still hoped that Lee would at last provide her with clothes, furs, cars, luxurious home, all that she had dreamed about from her early childhood. And Lee kept on working. As far as I know, he did not make friends with his co-workers, came to us to talk about Russia, and seldom, if ever, complained about his marital troubles. But that situation became gradually almost desperate. One day, Marina came over with a baby. She was badly bruised, and we convinced her that it was time to separate. Since we did not have room in our apartment, we discussed this country by brutalizing one's wife. My friend, I told Lee, realizing that he was receptive in his past, saying a little more about his disagreements with his wife. There was nothing new in them for us, just another proof that this separation was necessary. I was asked over and over again in the last 5 years, why did you waste your time with this crazy Marxist, his baby and his slovenly wife? And I would like to add to this a lot of explanations.
And so, speaking from experience, and not having as much knowledge or money, I've had friends that have marital problems, and the last thing you want to do is get involved in that. The last thing you want to do is choose sides and to try to mediate and things like that, because you're on a losing slope there. Okay? The best thing to do is to let them both know that you care about them, you wish them the best, but when they're going to act like crazies like that and start fighting and shouting and throwing things, that you're just not going to be involved, that you're going to withdraw from that. I learned this the hard way, because there's nothing that you can do that will improve the situation or change the situation. Okay? You're not a professional marriage counselor or whatever. But yet, here we have, again, it's like Elon Musk helping the janitor with his marital problems. Okay? It doesn't make any fucking sense. First of all, the way the rich people are, and I know a lot of rich people that are like that, they're just going to ignore them. They're going to blow them off, cut them off, because they just don't want to have to deal with that kind of shit. Okay? And the way a lot of rich people are, if they have marital problems, they're going to keep it silent in between themselves and not let it get out. Okay? So, it's just a losing battle to try to get in to help people with their marital problems, and they're fighting and screaming and stuff like that. I've learned the hard way, and I've learned from counselors that what you do is you sanction the couple. You say, hey, look, we care about you, but we're not going to have anything to do with you as long as you're fighting in front of us and carrying on like a bunch of children. That there's a wall. You have to make, this is the limit. This is where it stops, okay? Because if not, you'll get dragged into their chaos, dragged down with them, and it never ends well. Never. And if you are involved, it'll never end well for you. And then you have to think about the future, that later on, if they're divorced, okay, somehow you've chosen sides, that now you've got a rift between you and the other person. So what you have to do is say, look, we love you both, we care about you both, but we're not gonna deal with you guys when you are acting like a bunch of children and yelling and screaming and throwing stuff. That's the line you have to draw right there. That's what I've learned the hard way. And when I was younger, I used to think, oh, well, if we just apply logic and caring and love and kindness and show them that we care, that they'll see that, and then they'll change their ways and things will get better from worse to better. But no, it never does. That's not the way human nature is. That's not the way people are. It's the same thing with drug addicts. It's the same thing with alcoholics. You're never going to help them. You're never going to change them. People, when they get to be like 20-something and beyond, they're going to be that way, and there's nothing you can do to change them. Okay? I've learned this the hard way, and it don't matter how much kindness or understanding or love you present to them, it's just they're never going to change, okay? It's just, you're not going to change them is what I'm saying. The only way they're going to change is if they hit bottom and crash and, change themselves. The only way to change people is for them to change themselves, okay? And a lot of times, like I said, people have to crash, hit bottom, hit that wall before they realize. And even then, a lot of times they won't change, or they'll partially change, And but that's just the way it is. But here we've got this multimillionaire, rich guy hanging out with the richest people on the planet, and in Texas, but he's hanging out with this lowly, guy that doesn't make any money. See, at this time he's working at Jaeger Childs, Stovall, the printing company, which he helped him get the job there. So it doesn't make any sense what they're doing there, okay? But for some reason, they're trying to help them. Anyway, keep going.
Just memories of what I found interesting and attractive
but George,
about Lee.
Let's keep this on the track now.
Yeah.
I know you have many recollections on Lee Harvey Oswald, but why don't we go through? I have collected during this first half of our interview a number of questions that I would like to ask you and clarifications on certain points. Why don't we do it up? You want it at this point?
At
it's
this
okay
point.
with me.
Fine.
Okay. And let me go over a number of things that I have found we should elaborate on a little bit. And my first question to you would be, you have indicated that Oswald had a definite liking for President John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
How did that become clear to you?
Well, first of all, I remember talking to him and looking at the cover of Life magazine, which has the picture of President Kennedy, and he commented how handsome he was, how young, how attractive. Again, I think this appealed to him, and every time he spoke about President Kennedy, he spoke kindly of his effort to improve the racial relations in the United States.
There you go.
You feel his racial, that was one of his basic preoccupations.
That was
from
one of his
childhood
basic
in New Orleans.
preoccupation and one of his basic motivations. And from that point of view, he definitely had love and respect for President Kennedy. He, I have to say, did not respect particularly his background. For instance, the fact that his father, Joseph Kennedy, made money in the whiskey business, and he knew about it. And he mentioned that to me. But I do not think that this distracted from his general, very positive feeling towards President.
Very interesting that a lot of people perceive Kennedy as a liberal and stuff like that, because if you look at Joseph Kennedy was actually pro-Hitler, anti-communist, pro-Hitler. Matter of fact, he was so pro-Hitler that when he was ambassador in London, he was recalled from London by FDR because of his pro-Nazi statements. This is before the U.S. got involved in the war. And, it so disturbed the FDR administration. But see, Kennedy, this was before the Holocaust. People knew about the Holocaust, things like that. So, like Lindbergh, Joseph Kennedy was anti-communist. He saw Hitler as a right-wing bulwark against communism, which seemed to be, all over the place. And so that's one of the things that he was thinking about, and therefore, Joseph Kennedy was recalled. Now, the thing about Joseph Kennedy getting rich from the whiskey business is total bullshit. It's been completely, debunked. Joseph Kennedy was involved in stocks. He was a stock broker, I guess you could say. He had a lot of clients, okay? And that's how he got his wealth, okay? He didn't get rich in the whiskey business. Now, he did, after Prohibition was, after alcohol became legal in 1933, he did have distilleries in Canada and Scotland that imported whiskey. But he didn't get rich through the whiskey business. This was just another investment that he was doing. So how Kennedy got rich is he was getting rich off of commissions from investments for other people. And then he took his commissions and invested that. And that's how he got rich. He didn't get rich off illegally importing or running, whiskey or alcohol during Prohibition. That's total bullshit. Again, it's just another one of these lies that is put out there by the right wing to disparage the Kennedys, just like this BS about, Robert Kennedy, supposedly killed Marilyn Monroe, all this kind of bullshit. It was having an affair with Marilyn Monroe, and all these other things saying that, Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were screwing every damn skirt around town, when the facts are that Kennedy, was in a back brace because his back had been damaged when his PT boat was hit by the Japanese cruiser in World War II, and then he was in a plane crash that further damaged his back. So he was in a back brace, a metal back brace most of his time. And when he was in the presidency, and even as a senator, he was under a lot of medication, what would be considered almost, toxic narcotics nowadays, okay? So I find it highly unusual, difficult to believe that Kennedy, who had many, many children running around the White House, and his wife, okay, not counting all the Secret Service, okay, would have any time or energy or the ability to have all these multiple affairs that were supposedly going on between him and Marilyn Monroe and this Exeter woman, and then this, this woman that was killed a year later. I find it difficult to believe that Kennedy was having all these affairs. This is just BS propaganda put out to disparage him, to make Kennedy look less of a human or greater human than he was, to knock him down a little bit, to make killing him just a little bit more acceptable.
President Kennedy and his wife.
As far as politics in the United States is concerned, did Lee have any ideas about Democrats, Republicans, and did he tie it in with international affairs like U.S. and USSR?
That, I think, is an interesting question. And for instance, he mentioned to me one day that all the politicians are the same, and the people all over the world are decent. Those are the leaders who create confusion in the world. And he made a very amusing comparison between the Republican and Democratic Party in the United States on one side, and said that they disagree on certain subject, but still they do not fight each other. And then he made a comparison between the Western civilization, the Western democratic countries, and the Soviet Union, and he said, well, that's the same thing between the Western countries and the Soviet Union. There are different points of view, but we should not fight each other.
Mm-hmm. What did Lee say about his Marine Corps days? What did he feel? How did he feel about the Marine Corps in the United States?
The Marine Corps in the United States, he had a rather unpleasant memory. He did not like the discipline. He considered that the Marine Corps was a highly rightist organization, and actually he thought even that it would be a danger to the democratic institutions in the United States someday as a powerful military group which might take over sometimes.
In other words, a coup d'etat.
That's exactly that.
By the military.
That's exactly that. And he mentioned at the same time that President Truman wanted to abolish the Marine Corps. He knew about it, and he seemed to agree with it. Because that was his own opinion.
Yeah. Did he speak to you ever about his dishonorable discharge?
So, what he's saying there is exactly correct. The thing that's interesting about what's happened in America back in the 60s, and it's happening even up to today, is that I'm not saying it's a military dictatorship, but if the military came in, the tanks were rolling down the street, and there was a general in the White House saying we're in charge, that would be obvious, in our face, and something that we would oppose. Okay? But, and say the CIA, the intelligence groups were running from running things in the background there. But if you have a situation where you have very, very wealthy people that are controlling or manipulating with money and power and other ways politicians to get what they want and still have some kind of semblance of democracy, it's not really democracy, it's sort of a autocracy democracy where you've got certain aspects of our country controlled by the wealthy, but you still has a semblance of some kind of democratic process, like on the local level, But, I'm not saying that we're being controlled by the military, the rich people completely, but they definitely do have their influence in the world. I mean, when you can have hundreds of thousands of people protesting against the war in Vietnam, against the war in Iraq, and it still goes ahead despite all the evidence or lack of evidence. You have to wonder who's really in control. I mean, seriously, do we have a democracy where we all sit around the campfire and discuss things and then we vote on it? Or do we have a control, are we controlled by something else? Okay? I don't know. I do find it interesting that, you know, after Kennedy was assassinated, it's basically this semi-control by the intelligence and military complex in the United States out of fear. And then a lot of people don't know this, but Kennedy's assassinated in November, and Khrushchev is forced out very, very soon after that. So the two leaders that were seeking peace were actually forced out. It wasn't really a coup d'etat where they came in with the military and said, hey, you're under arrest. They gave him basically the option, you know, you can either go to jail or you can go to your dacha. And he chose to go to his dacha, and he retired. And I do find it interesting that even in Russia today, that what we've had in Russia the last 24 years is a dictatorship of the intelligence community through Putin. Everyone involved in Putin's government is all former KGB. Okay? So basically you've got the CIA controlling or manipulating the U.S. government, and then you've got their counterpart, the KGB, controlling Russia also. Anyway, we keep going.
Charge from the...
He never spoke about his dishonorable discharge, and I found out later that it was not dishonorable, but undesirable discharge. First, he had an honorable discharge. Then, he obviously made a false statement that he was going to leave the Marine Corps to help his mother, and instead of that, he did not do it and went to Russia to investigate the world prospects for himself. And that's when he obtained this type of a discharge, the undesirable discharge, but not dishonorable.
Jean, you have anything?
So also I wanted to say something about that. So when you go, a lot of people don't know this, that when you go in the military, even though you serve 2, 3, 4 years, after that, you're obligated to serve about double that amount of time in the reserves, okay? So if you serve 4 years in the military, you're supposed to serve 8 year active duty, you're supposed to serve about 8 years in the reserves. And whether that is you're assigned to a reserve unit, or it's just the individual ready reserve, where you let them know that you're available, and you may have to come in once a year for physical and some weapons checks and stuff like that. So Oswald, once he got out, you know, just 3-4 months ahead of time, which is kind of odd if you think about it. Okay, so if you've been in 3 years, what's another 3 or 4 months? And then you can go off into Russia, and it's no big deal. But for some reason, he made this appeal about helping his mother, who supposedly was injured. Okay, and then after he made his appeal, he got his passport that day. One day, he got his passport. Then he took off, went to visit his mother in New Orleans for 3 or 4 days, and then he went, in Fort Worth, and then he ended up in New Orleans, and then he ended up in Russia. So I find it odd, and if you look at his record, you'll find out that he wasn't doing any kind of radar duty. He actually was assigned to El Toro Marine Corps base, but no one remembers him being there for like 6 months. So from like, let's see, he left in September or so. So from like March to September, he was assigned to El Toro, but no one ever remembers him being there. They can't find anybody remember him being there, which I find interesting. And then the reason he got the undesirable is not because he supposedly lied about getting out early. He didn't fulfill his reserve obligation or let them know, okay, that I can't fulfill my reserve obligation because I'm not in the United States. Okay? So, to me, what that says, and then you see that Oswald is completely obsessed with trying to get this changed. Okay? Even though he defected to Russia, but that's important to, and he didn't supposedly like the military, but supposedly that's important, that his undesirable discharge is important to him. Okay? And not that anyone would know. He could just go around saying he had an honorable discharge, which he did. He doesn't have to tell anybody he was changed to undesirable. It's not like they're going to check unless he's getting like some kind of security clearance for a government job. You know, when you're stacking books, they're not going to be calling for your Marine Corps records. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of odd that he would spend a lot of time. I mean, he was sending these letters from Dallas to the Department of Navy about getting this record changed. He was, going to Dean Andrews about getting his record changed. And don't you think that's odd that Dean Andrews is connected with Shaw, and Shaw with Ferry, and Ferry with Bannister, but supposedly Shaw didn't know Oswald. So what that tells me, though, is that Oswald was referred to Dean Andrews, his lawyer, by Shaw or by Bannister. Anyway. All right, so we're going to stop here and go into these other things. All right, so this is another part about the Constitution. And when I was talking about the Japanese Americans whose right to jury trial was suspended, not even went along with. So this is one of the things that makes America and Western democracy very unique, is the jury trial. The trial by jury, trial by our peers, okay? A lot of other countries, even countries like Sweden and Germany and other places like that, don't have jury trials. They have these 3 or 5 member judges or legal scholars that judge the case. Okay? And I prefer the trial by jury because it's just common folks, taken off the street, basically, and it's like you and me and your judge, because if you look at judges and prosecutors and you leave that up to them to judge if you're guilty, you're always going to be guilty in their eyes, okay? Because everyone that comes to their courts is under prosecution, so the weight of all that is going to make you even more guilty. But this goes back to the old English days. It actually goes back to the Anglo-Saxon days, when basically they had lords and barons and other people that of royalty, the rulers, the landed gentry, okay, and so the king would set up a court, okay, but the landed gentry knew that all their rights and all their land could be taken away by the king if they're allowed just the king to judge them. So they set up this procedure where that, hey, all the landed gentry were all equals here. If the king's courts can take it away from me, they can take it away from you. Okay? They can take my property, my rights, my castle, my wealth, everything from me, they can take away from you too. So that's why they insisted through the Magna Carta that they all be judged amongst themselves, okay? Eventually, this filters down to the common folks, okay? People that were tied to the land. They were judged by their landlord, I guess you could say. Because back then, all the land in England was divided by the conquerors. So if you had a population of 100, 200, 500,000 people that were would have been called Britons, okay, because they weren't English, they were Britons. And then you had these English settlers that came from, the Angles part of Germany and the Saxon part of Germany. They came and settled in Germany. Those overlords would have been about 50,000, 70,000, okay, and of those, there would have been the higher lords, maybe 10,000, maybe 5,000, okay. So you've got 5,000 people controlling 500,000 people, or maybe 1 million people, and they've divided the lands up amongst them. And everyone that's under that lord, that's what they call it, a landlord, when you pay your rent to the landlord, this goes back to those days, was under his system and judged by that landlord, okay? And so they set up a system where, the serfs, they called them because they were tied to the land, they didn't have the same rights as the lords, but they were equal. All the poor were equal amongst each other, okay? And so this system carried on up through the ages into England, and it's, of course, being that we're descended from England, English settlers, we brought this over to America. This is where it comes from. Anyway, but this all actually even goes back to the Viking days and to the English days, where the tribal chieftains, you're sitting around and you all sat in this big house that everybody can sleep in, and then you listen to your lord as he lorded over you, I guess you could say. But everyone besides the Lord was all equal amongst each other when they came to the Lord, okay? When justice was concerned. So if a guy stole some guy's pig, okay, or cow, he would come to his Lord and say, look, this is my pig, this is my cow, and he didn't have it before, and here's a witness that says that pig belonged to me, or that cow belonged to me. And then he would present his case before his Lord, okay, in the house, in the big house, on his court, I guess you could say. That's where we get the idea of the court. So he would stand court before the Lord, and he would say, look, this pig belonged to me. I got a witness that says, it definitely, and he would present his evidence, and then the other guy would say, no, this pig was mine. I've always had it, and here's my evidence. And then it was left up to that Lord who presided over that court to decide justice, okay? The pig belongs to you, the pig doesn't belong to them, or whatever. Or cut the pig in half, and then you both have a festival or something like that, And this goes back even to the Bible, when, what was it, King Solomon? Yeah, King Solomon. And this woman, she came before the court of King Solomon and said, hey, King, this child belongs to me, and this other woman took the child, okay, and I want my child back, and she was never pregnant. She can't have a baby, so she stole my child, and now she's keeping the child for herself. And then the other woman says, no, this is my child. Here's a witness saying that I have this child, and da-da-da-da-da. And so the wisdom of King Solomon, he couldn't really decide who was telling the truth. So what he decided to do was to fake them out. So he says, look, well, I can't really decide whose child it is. So what we'll do is we'll take the child and cut him in half and give each of you a half of the child, okay? And so they took the child and put him on a pedestal. This is all mythical. I don't think that's really happened. Some kind of table, and they got, a guy with a big axe, and they were just about to chop the child in half. And a woman ran up and she goes, no, 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 give the child to the other woman. I don't want half the child, I'd rather the child live whole. And then King Solomon gave her the child, okay, because the other woman was silent while the child was about to get chopped in half, and that told him that that woman didn't have any loving connections to the child, and that the loving parent of the child was more willing to let the child live and give it up than to have half the child. So then he gave the child to the woman who protested and said, give the child to the other woman. That was the court, and that was in King Solomon's court. And that's where we get some of the, because most of Europe was Christian, but also the courts go back to the days of the Vikings, and the pagan era too, because they didn't have Roman justice or Roman law. So you had all these tribal leaders that would settle things in their court, and it usually involved, nobles. So you'd have the king, you'd have nobles, and they would be fighting over usually land, and a lot of times these things were settled through combat. A lot of times, though, they were settled through the king's courts. Eventually, these things by combat, you see like in these King Arthur movies and stuff, went away, and there was more settling, the disputes between nobles in the courts, the king's courts. And then you see in England the same thing. The king became even up to today, Her Majesty's courts, or it used to be Her Majesty's, now it's King, whatever the new king's name is. It's the king's courts, okay, because the king appoints the courts and the justice system and stuff like that. And of course in America it's the people's courts, because the people, we elect the governor appoints the judges. In other countries or other states, judges are elected. I think like in Texas, a lot of the local judges are elected. The prosecutor is elected, the defense, the attorney general is elected, things like that. So it's the people's courts, okay? But anyway, so this trial by jury goes back quite a ways. You see how the Japanese weren't allowed a trial by jury. They would just have their rights taken away. And we'll go down this little thing here. They didn't get a fair trial. They didn't even have a speedy trial or a jury trial. They were presumed guilty, okay, and they weren't allowed bail or appeal. And they were convicted without any kind of jury trial, which goes against the American justice system. And of course, all these things are done through fear that the Japanese would be a fifth rail or fourth rail or whatever, these Japanese Americans would somehow help the Japanese, even though it was never proven any case that these Japanese Americans were done like that. Same thing with Oswald. Oswald was never afforded his day in court. He didn't get a speedy trial. He didn't get any counsel. There was no attorney present in all his questioning. He had the right against self-incrimination, but he didn't know about that right. And so he kept talking. Okay. He wasn't allowed bail. He wasn't allowed the jury trial. He was executed before. Okay. So all these things were denied Oswald, things that we take for granted nowadays that we would expect even for the worst criminals like Trump or some serial murderer or killer. Oswald wasn't allowed these things. Another great thing about our American justice, I guess you could call it, system, is that a lot of people don't know this, but probably 75% of people that are in prison never got a jury trial. Never. They pled a deal with the DA. So they got arrested on some kind of drug charge. The DA, they were in jail. They couldn't make bail, couldn't get out. They're sitting in jail for 6 months, a year sometimes, waiting for a slot to get a jury to get some kind of trial. They can't make bail, so they're sitting there in jail for 6 months, maybe a year. The district attorney comes to them and says, hey, you can get out in another year if you plead guilty. Okay? If you don't plead guilty, you're going to sit here maybe another year while you're going through a trial, and then most likely you're going to get convicted, and then you're going to serve 5 to 10 years in prison. So 10 years versus 1 more year after you've been sitting in jail, sweating it out for 6 months or another year. Most of these guys are exhausted. They're not smart enough. They don't have the money. They don't have the connections. So they go along and cop a plea. That's what they call copying a plea with the district attorney. This is why district attorneys can say, hey, re-elect me. I've got a 95% conviction rate, which is true because they're either going to go, when you have someone under arrest, they're either going to go one of about 4 different ways. 95% of them are going to cop a plea. Okay? I'd say about 90% of them are going to cop a plea bargain. And they're going to go to jail for that. Or they're going to go on probation for that. Another 5%, the district attorney's just going to decide, hey, we're never going to win this case. We're just going to drop this. Not enough evidence. Or they've been told to drop the case by a judge because there's not enough evidence to present. Or a grand jury has decided there's not enough evidence to indict. Okay? And then the other 10% or 15%, they're going to go to trial, and maybe, out of that 15%, maybe 3-4%, the jury is going to vote to not convict. They're going to walk. And then the other 12% are going to get convicted because the evidence is just overwhelming. But anyway, that's the state of our justice system. It all has to do with how much money you have, what connections you have. We have a great system of justice if you have the money to afford an attorney, which is kind of one of the downsides. But it is much better than other countries, believe me. Anyway, all right, so we're going to stop here, and we'll go on, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. All right, take care.